Hello, I'm delighted today to be having a conversation with my colleague Sam, and we're going to be exploring what has happened in her organisation around roles and confirmation practices. But Sam, before we get going, could you introduce yourself to the listeners and tell us a bit about why this feels worth doing now?
Hi, I'm Sam Jones and I work for the Stroke Association, which is a national charity working to improve the lives of people affected by stroke. My role is the Associate Director for the North East and Yorkshire locality. And we've been exploring for a while in the Stroke Association now the type of culture that we want to really have as an organisation. And we did lots of research, looking outwards, trying to learn from others. And we obviously met you, Helen, and had a really great conversation. I think we felt that a lot of what we wanted to achieve aligned with the work that you were doing. And I was really excited at the thought of confirmation practices, initially around roles. And I was really excited about how it gave ownership to individuals and created accountability really for ways of working. So it felt really right to start exploring that.
Thank you. And am I right that some of your colleagues have been doing the level 7 with Happy Henry and his team?
Yes, yes, and I think that's how we came to be aware of you, Helen. So some colleagues have been working with Happy and doing the level 7, and they made us aware of the Happy conference. I think that happens annually.
Hmm, hmm.
And you were a speaker there, and I remember sitting and listening to you, Helen, and thinking, oh wow, this is amazing. This just sounds really exciting and a really empowered way of working, which is why we reached out to have further conversations with you. So yeah, I think without my colleagues being involved in the level 7 happy work, I haven't been involved in that, but I would hope our paths would have crossed, but maybe not, Helen.
Thank you. And you'll know that I talk quite a lot about job descriptions and how we typically don't look back at our job descriptions and they don't often direct our work day to day. So, where were you up to with job descriptions, with roles, with how you knew what you were doing together with your colleagues? What was happening for you before we started our work?
Yeah, that was really interesting, Helen. Before we started our work, the job description was there at recruitment, and I guess there was an expectation that individuals would use that to inform them, and yeah, help them make decisions around where they should be spending their time and what's important, really. But I think if I'm being honest, and I'm perhaps only speaking for myself today, I never really revisited my job description. And as a line manager, I never really revisited job descriptions with new recruits unless there was a specific performance issue. And often, if somebody I felt wasn't performing very well in the role, there might have been some areas for development and things that we needed to work on before we could confirm them in post, as we have a 6 month probation period. And we kind of go back to the job description and really start unpicking it. But it never kind of joined up for me that I should be, supporting people to understand what their job description actually meant and what it meant in their day-to-day roles. So yeah, it was really interesting reflecting back on that when we started the work with you about how that, yeah, I had some digging to do to find my job description. So I guess that showed the kind of level of importance that I personally put on using that document to support me in my own self-management, in my own performance management, and making sure that I was delivering well.
And I remember when we started to think about what your roles would be, and obviously we did that with a group of you, we both looked back at your diary and what you'd actually been doing over the last month, as well as job descriptions. What was the personal impact on you, Sam, when we started to think about roles in a different way?
I think I was really overwhelmed initially, Helen, if I'm being honest.
Hmm.
I found it quite emotional at times as well, because when I really started to look at where I was spending my time and where I was adding value to stroke survivors and the organisation and our vision and our purpose, I started to kind of realize, gosh, I'm so busy being busy,
Hmm.
that I'm not being effective in my role. I'm not spending my time perhaps where, the priorities really should be. Um, and I just started to look at all these meetings that I was in. And I think some of it was kind of a post-COVID impact.
Hmm.
Prior to COVID, I was having to drive between meetings, we cover a geographical area, so I had to physically get from meetings. And I guess it'd give me time to process between meetings and think about what was important and what I was doing next. Whereas post COVID, it was just like, oh, no travel time. Let's just have back to back meetings all the time. And I started to reflect that I was spending so much time in meetings, but I wasn't actually doing anything um, that I was supposed to be doing. I didn't have time to take actions away from meetings, or I was having to work over and, you know, potentially face burnout because I was, working more than perhaps I should have been. I wasn't getting that balance between what was important and what was urgent. So I guess, yeah, it was a real eye opener for me, but it made me feel quite inefficient, that I wasn't performing very well in my role. And I remember feeling quite tearful at that point, thinking, goodness me, something does need to change. But without actually sitting down and really focusing in, I probably would still be in that same place now, if I'm being honest, Helen.
Oh gosh, that is very honest and brave of you to say that, Sam. And it's so easy, isn't it, to have, particularly on Teams and with electronic diaries, people just putting more meetings in your diary, and for your job to feel going from one meeting to another. And I guess there was something else that felt quite culturally different when we started this work together, which is talking about metrics and how you know whether what you're doing is effective or not, and what other people will see. And again, I don't often see that in job descriptions. So in the table that essentially we've been using around confirmation practices, which of course were developed by the fantastic Andy Brogan, it has the title of the role, the name of the role, the purpose of it, and how it connects to delivering the purpose of the team and the organization, what you actually do. But unusually, how would you know if you're being successful? What would people see? I wonder whether there's any examples you can give us from your roles to make that a bit clearer for people. Sam, do you have them with you?
Yes, I do. I guess talking about the meeting angle, I guess one of the roles I identified as being quite important in my role was that connector and convener, really making sure that I am meeting with people and sharing information, and that we're all aligned and making shared decisions and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So some of the metrics I kind of put around that was more around the time outside of meetings, making sure that I'm, checking the agenda ahead of schedule to know what discussions are happening in that space, so that I can bring relevant information and examples. And also that time after a meeting, I, what am I doing in that meeting? Am I representing others? Should I be sharing information afterwards? And again, I wasn't doing that. So some of the metrics was around holding that time, making sure I'm reading agendas, making sure I'm doing the prep before meetings. And then it's the after a meeting, what am I doing? Who needs to know what decisions have been made? What are the implications? So some of that is around reflection time as well as preparation time. And I guess that was a real eye opener for me when I was looking at my diary, thinking, I don't have any space for this right now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
How am I going to create that space? So those metrics are really, really important, just to make sure that you can take some actions. What was really important for me was having those conversations and then using the coaching card to say, okay, how can I change this? Because I don't have space in my diary. How can I make it, and what's important?
Thank you, because again, so easy for people to think that their role or their job is going to meetings, but as you just said, it's how you prepare for it, the purpose of the meeting, the contribution that you intend to make, and have you made that contribution and followed up with actions. But people might listen to this and think, well, surely that's just good meeting practice. What is so special about this? How is this different to just having better, more well-written job descriptions? And I think that's where the confirmation practice element of it comes into its own. You mentioned a few minutes ago about a coaching card, and we've been using a process for coaching, again developed with Andy Brogan, that means that in pairs, so either with a colleague or in one-to-ones, we can coach each other around confirmation practices to identify the role where we think we are perhaps least strong or want to improve, and to set a really specific goal. Now, I remember you telling me a story about when you first used this with your colleagues, and I think you said something about thinking you knew them very well, but this was an eye-opener in some way. Could you tell us about that?
Yeah, Helen. I think because we started doing the process as a team, so it was myself and colleagues of mine who directly report to me. So we have lots of conversations very frequently. I do one-to-ones with them. We have team catch-ups. And I guess in that space, you were the person who was taking ownership of using the coaching card and helping us to get used to the process. And we were in that space, and you did it with both of my colleagues actually, and I was sat there thinking, oh my goodness, why have we not had this conversation before? Because they were looking at all of their roles, and they chose the role that felt important for them to be working on. So in conversations I'd been having with people, it was what's important right now, and generally it's some crisis that's just happened or something that's cropped up, and you end up spending a lot of time focused there, and it feels really important in the moment. And but actually stepping back and going through this process, my colleague brought to you something we hadn't talked about, perhaps because whenever we were catching up, we weren't in that crisis point. And you know, she worked through that process with you, and I learned a lot. And I was thinking, goodness me, we talk a lot, but that is the first time that perhaps we've had an open conversation where they've been able to really sit back and consider, what are we going to talk about? It hasn't been reactive, it hasn't been in relation to something that's already happening. They got to choose an area to work on, and as you coach them through it, I thought this is a real eye-opener for me. And that was perhaps the light bulb moment that really made me see how beneficial confirmation practices can be, because you know, you're giving that oversight on your whole role. It's not what's just important in the moment, and you're regularly going back to it and deciding what's important, and it helps you prioritize. And for me, you know, it means that we're being more efficient and effective, and it means we are looking at everybody's full role and not just those few things that perhaps we spend a lot of our time in our day-to-day roles, but the other things that are just as important get some airtime. And it's just meant our confidence and our communications as a team have really grown and benefited from that. And I've learned so much more about two individuals who I've worked with for the last kind of 5-6 years. I've learned so much more about them in the past 12 months since we started working with you, Helen.
Thank you. That's beautifully put. And I want to have a disclaimer here that when I was coaching your colleagues, and part of the work that we've been doing together in the Stroke Association is coaching colleagues to use confirmation practices and then supporting them to coach other people to do that without coaching qualifications. It's simply about having a sheet of questions in front of us that we work through. But I think, as you said there, the big difference that I've noticed is the separation of what's urgent and what's important. Because you said in usual one-to-ones or in your conversations together, it's often about problem solving and looking at the urgent stuff. But when we sit down and look at confirmation practices and look at, say, 7 of your roles, you score each of your roles between 1 and 5, depending on how confident you feel like you're delivering the role. And then you choose the one that you want to work on. So it means that every time you're doing this, whether that's in one-to-ones or another time, you have an opportunity to reflect on the whole of your role and how it's going and what you want to do differently. But you've done something different, Sam, haven't you? Because we've started off with your confirmation practices being about your roles, but you've extended them in 2 other areas. You've looked at them in relation to teamwork and also your growing edge or your personal development. Please, would you say a bit more about that?
Yeah, so we looked at some team agreements as a team as well, just to help us as a team be a bit more effective and get the most out of our time together. because I guess one of the things that we did realise was how much time we were spending in meetings, but actually nothing was really changing. And I think you know, having a look at our team agreements and making sure that the time we had together was effective and we were getting the most out of each other was really important. So we did look at team agreements with Michelle from your team, and she was really supportive in that. And we you know, took our team agreements and then used those in team confirmation practices. So, for example, one of our team agreements is committing to being fully present with each other and being honest when we're not able to do this. So, for example, you know, sometimes if we're feeling overloaded at work or there's lots going on and we've got this meeting in and we go in and we're not fully present because we're thinking about other things, you know, we're able to say that to each other, saying there's a lot going on right now and I want to be here and present in this meeting and give my all to our conversation, but I'm just letting you know there are other things going on. And it does allow us to maybe park a meeting or be a bit more compassionate with colleagues and say, okay, how can we help you be present in this meeting? So what we do now is revisit those team agreements and just kind of check in around confirmation practices. So again, using the scoring system and score against our team agreements to say, are we, you know, living up to these team agreements? We put them in place and they mean a lot to our team. It's how we've agreed to be together. How are we performing against those? So it's not just a chart that we've got on the wall saying this is how we are going to be together. We're actually really holding each other to account around that. And yeah, scoring ourselves against it, which has been really interesting to do. And then it has led to a couple of tweaks maybe to the team agreements as well through that process.
Thank you.
Sorry, go
on. I know that that'll be edited out for us, which is great. So Sam, you've got your confirmation practices for your role. I think you've added a couple related to team agreements that you personally want to work on. And I believe that you've added extra ones on around your growing edge or how you want to develop. So you've got sort of almost like 3 levels of areas of your working life that you're looking at. What does that feel like? What's that like for you? What difference is that making?
I think it's always making me look for the bigger picture and look at where I can grow and develop and be better. I think it's really important that we're always open to learning new things, not just in our day-to-day roles, but about ourselves as well. And I think the most recent kind of confirmation practices that I've been looking at, again with your support, Helen, has been around those you know, areas that I've wanted to work on and wanted to change, but things have held me back a little bit. You know, thinking about public speaking was one of the areas I wanted to kind of work on, not just public speaking, but speaking up in meetings where there's quite a few people. And you know, that's led to me exploring why do I find it a challenge and what's so difficult for me about this, and testing some assumptions. And that's led to me adding in into my confirmation practices kind of toolkit, new things to be focusing in on. I think one of them's around being more compassionate, so a compassion provider, but mainly to myself, to give myself compassion, and make sure that, you know, I'm treating mistakes as an opportunity to learn and that I don't kind of beat myself up if I make a mistake, and I don't hold grudges against myself, and I use positive language. So rather than berate myself if I've done something, it's okay, what can I learn from this and what are the positives that I can take out of that? So it has been interesting to extend the confirmation practices to, you know, those more kind of personal elements of self-development and learning and how I turn up in my day-to-day role, I guess.
So the confirmation practices that you're personally using at the moment are statements to do with your role, statements to do with how you want to go even further as a team player related to your team agreements, and then personally how you want to develop and grow as an individual. Sam, that sounds a million miles away from job descriptions.
It really is, Helen. It really is. And yeah, I kind of reflect and think how fortunate I have been to start exploring this and really understanding more about actually the different things that can really support you being more confident in your role, because it's taking a full kind of helicopter view, I guess, of everything about me that can make me deliver more for stroke survivors, be a better colleague at work, feel more confident in my role. And it's been, yeah, such a eye opener. I feel very fortunate and keen to share the learning, which I guess is why, despite me just saying I don't like public speaking or speaking up in a public forum, I'm here talking to you, Helen.
Thank you. And where are you going with this next in the Stroke Association? Because this hasn't ended with you, has it? What's happening next?
Yeah, so we started doing this as a very small team just to kind of start to learn and understand, would this, translate into something that's really positive. And, I know myself and my team have got actually lots and lots of benefits from working in this way. But we are quite a large organisation, and we wanted to explore, does this transfer to larger teams? So we're now working with another team in our northwest area who have a lot more members, so we can see how that translates for them. And we're also working with some of our frontline teams as well, our stroke support coordinators, just to see how it supports them in their roles as well, and delivering support to stroke survivors in the community. So really excited to see how it transfers over to those different areas of the charity.
Thank you. And I know that public speaking is something that you are focusing on. So if we imagine that Henry is asking you to present at the next Level 7 program or the conference, what would you be saying to people about roles and confirmation practices? What would you be saying might be worth paying attention to, particularly if people were feeling a bit skeptical?
I think be open to the process and try and listen and learn from others. I think for me, it has been a real eye opener. I guess if you'd have spoken to me 18 months ago, I probably would have felt quite effective in my role. I spoke earlier about, checking agendas and holding time. I did that, but I did it while I was perhaps in another meeting or I was squeezing it in. So it wasn't really thought through and considered. So I thought, yeah, it's fine. Everything's fine. I'm busy, but things are getting done. But it was only when somebody actually gave me the opportunity to stop and pause and reflect and really look at what I was doing that I started to reap benefits. So yeah, I guess be open to it, because we are all busy. We've all got lots of things to be getting on with and doing. But actually holding some time and holding some space to really start looking at this type of thing can really bring so many benefits to ways of working. I feel, my self-management, the performance management of myself is so much stronger than it was before. I feel I'm delivering so much more in my role than I was before. And so by creating a bit of space to stop and focus in, has actually delivered lots more benefits than me muddling through, keeping going at 100 miles an hour. So yeah, I guess that would be my main message.
Thank you. And I don't know anybody else who's done this, Sam, but I love that you've included self-compassion and compassion as elements of your confirmation practices so that you can be paying attention to your well-being and how compassionate you're being with yourself, as well as how compassionate you're being with others. Thank you so much for taking the time to explain what you're doing to me today.
Thanks, Helen.